you hear it like in the background of almost every conversation today. It's this creeping, this low-level anxiety about the future, specifically about the finish line.
Right.
We all have this kind of implicit understanding of the social contract. You spend your youth getting educated, you hustle through your middle decades.
You take on a side gig or two.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And eventually, you cross a finish line, you get to rest.
It's the dream, right?
But lately, there's this collective sensation that someone is secretly moving that finish line further and further away.
Definitely.
It feels like you're running on a treadmill, you're matching the speed, and then the incline quietly ticks up.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. The machine is just accelerating.
Right. And most people, they look around at their shrinking savings or their delayed retirement plans, and they just assume the modern economy is broken.
Sure, yeah.
They assume it's failing. Okay, let's unpack this, because today we are taking a deep dive into something that shows it's not failing at all.
Right. The assumption of failure is, it's a comforting illusion, honestly.
That's a comforting illusion.
Yeah, because it implies that if we just fix a few bugs in the software, things will go back to normal. But the data we're going to look at today suggests something entirely different.
Which is?
The system isn't broken. It's actually operating with brutal efficiency based on a blueprint that was quietly re-engineered over the last 4 decades.
Wow. Okay, so the mission today, the source we're using for this deep dive, is a massive working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research.
Yeah, the NBER.
Right. And the authors are 3 top economists, James Banks, Carl Emmerson, and Gemma Tetlow. And they didn't just look at a few recent surveys, right?
Oh, not at all. They pulled 40 years of incredibly granular data.
40 years.
Yeah, specifically from the United Kingdom, stretching from 1975 all the way up to 2015.
And they tracked everything, right? Like employment rates, wages, self-reported health policy shifts across multiple generations.
Everything.
Yeah.
And what they uncovered fundamentally dismantles the narrative that we're all fed about aging, work, and wealth.
So just a heads up for you listening, we aren't going to skim the surface here or get bogged down in dry academic jargon.
No, not at all.
We're going to look at facts that will honestly slap you in the face and completely overturn what you thought you knew.
What's fascinating here is the choice of the UK for this data set. It's critical to understand.
Why the UK specifically?
Because the UK serves as the perfect canary in the coal mine for global capital-driven economies.
Okay, makes sense.
They experienced deindustrialization, the shift to a service economy, massive welfare reforms, and the privatization of pensions on a timeline that perfectly mirrors and often precedes the rest of the developed world.
It's like a crystal ball.
Exactly. What happened in Britain between 1975 and 2015 is the ultimate endgame preview for aging societies everywhere. The rules of human labor were totally rewritten.
And the ink dried before most of the public even realized the contract had been amended.
Yeah, precisely.
All right, let's start by shattering the most persistent cultural image we have right now. There's this widespread narrative that elderly men are being forced to work harder and longer than at any point in modern history.
The classic working grandpa myth.
Right. We picture this tragic image of an 80-year-old man forced to scan barcodes at a grocery store or drive for a rideshare app just to pay for his prescriptions.
Which drives a massive amount of outrage.
Huge outrage. But when you look at the actual NBER data for men aged 55 to 64, that narrative completely falls apart, doesn't it?
It does. The data presents a reality that is almost the exact inverse of that cultural image.
The exact inverse. Wait, how?
Well, if you chart the employment rates for men in that 55 to 64 age bracket over that 40-year period, you don't see a steady, cruel climb of increasing labor.
Okay, what do you see?
You see a massive U-curve.
A U-curve?
Yeah. In 1975, the employment rate for these older men was extremely high. But from 1975 down to the mid-90s, there was a cliff edge drop.
A cliff edge. So millions of older men essentially just vanished from the workforce.
Exactly. They were gone.
I want to pause on that drop because, a cliff edge in macroeconomics doesn't just happen by accident.
Right. It takes a massive structural shift.
Yeah. Millions of men don't just wake up in, say, 1982 and collectively decide they're tired of working. What structural lever was pulled to cause that kind of mass exit?
You have to look at the economic bedrock of the era. The late 70s and 80s saw the rapid dismantling of traditional heavy industry and manufacturing.
Oh, so the factory closures.
Right. These were sectors heavily populated by older male workers who had been doing physically demanding jobs for 30 years.
And when those closed, they couldn't just pivot to coding, obviously.
Exactly. When the factories, the mines, the shipyards closed, these men didn't transition into sitting at a computer in a service sector office.
What happened to them?
The system essentially allowed them to exit. They were absorbed by early retirement packages, or they shifted onto disability benefits.
Which were much easier to get back then, right?
Yeah. Far more accessible at the time. The economy structurally shed older male labor.
Okay, so they hit the bottom of this U curve in the mid-90s. And then, according to the data, the curve starts to slope back up.
Yeah, they start returning to the workforce.
Right.
We see a slow 20-year recovery in male employment from 1995 up to 2015.
But here is the counterintuitive fact that the authors highlight, the real face slap moment. Even after 20 solid years of employment recovery, the labor participation rate for older men in 2015 was still lower than it was back in 1975.
Let that sink in. It was still lower.
That is staggering to me. Despite all the gig economy hustle, despite the rising cost of living, older men as a demographic are not working more frequently than their grandfathers did 40 years ago.
No, they haven't even recovered their historical baseline.
Which immediately begs the question, right? If older men are working less, but the sheer size and output of the economy has exploded over the last 40 years.
Someone has to be doing the work.
Exactly. Where did the labor come from? Who filled that massive void?
The void was filled by an unprecedented surge in female labor. And the data leaves absolutely no ambiguity here.
None at all. I mean, this is where the charts in the report look less like a trend and more like a rocket launch.
Whoa, totally.
While older men were spending 20 years just trying to claw their way back out of that U-curve, the employment rate for older women, again, looking at that critical 55 to 64 age bracket, went on a relentless, unbroken ascent.
It's just a straight lineup. Starting from the mid-'80s, the line representing female employment in this age group shoots upward at a steep, unyielding angle.
No dips.
There are no significant dips or U-curves. By the time we reach 2015, their employment rates hit absolute, historical, record-breaking maximums.
Wow.
They didn't recover to a past baseline because this level of older female labor participation had literally never existed before.
They created an entirely new macroeconomic paradigm.
Yeah, they really did.
Now, I'm looking at this, and my immediate instinct, and probably for a lot of you listening, is to view it through the lens of social progress.
Right. Feminism, the shifting culture.
Yeah, the 70s and 80s were the era of the feminist movement gaining real institutional traction. We saw the lowering of discriminatory barriers, women gaining access to higher education, the dismantling of the old boys club mentalities. So isn't this massive upward line simply the victory march of social liberation?
It's a fair question.
Right. Why frame it as a relentless flood or a systemic requirement rather than just women finally getting the opportunity to have lifelong careers?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, social liberation is definitely the enabler.
Okay.
But it doesn't entirely explain the velocity or the lead stage persistence of the data.
Meaning the sheer numbers don't add up to just pure choice.
Exactly. When barriers to entry fall, you expect to see an influx. But the sheer scale of this increase, particularly for women pushing into their late 50s and 60s, points to a systemic economic engine that grew completely dependent on their labor.
Dependent. That's a scary word.
It is. The macroeconomic environment shifted from a model where a single income could plausibly support a household.
All right, the classic single earner family.
To a model where dual incomes became a structural necessity just to maintain the exact same standard of living.
So it's the difference between having the freedom to work and the economic obligation to never stop working.
Precisely. The system didn't just open the door, it eventually locked it behind them.
Wow. Lock them in.
Yeah. Think about it. The entire structure of housing costs, education costs, basic inflation, it all calibrated itself around the assumption that both partners in a household would generate income continuously until retirement age.
You can actually see this play out anecdotally if you look at generational dynamics in, like, any family.
Oh, for sure.
Think about how a grandfather who worked in the 70s viewed his trajectory. He likely hit 60 or 65, got the gold watch, and completely stopped working.
It was done.
Done. Now look at a mother or grandmother today in her early 60s. She is likely still deeply entrenched in her career.
Juggling emails, managing shifts.
Exactly. Entirely integrated into the modern labor machine.
Yeah.
You are literally witnessing the results of this exact 40-year chart playing out in your own family.
And that shift at the dinner table sets the stage for a much more disruptive trend that the NBER authors identified.
Okay, what's that?
We are looking at a massive structural status reversal between generations.
Okay, let's unpack the generational aspect, because there is an immense amount of cultural tension here right now.
Oh, huge tension.
We are so conditioned to believe that youth is the ultimate currency in the labor market. The narrative is always that young, tech-savvy, energetic workers naturally dominate the economy.
While older workers slowly fade into the background.
Exactly. But this report takes a sledgehammer to that idea. Older workers aren't fading. They are aggressively taking back the reins of the labor market.
The authors quantified this by looking at the ratio of older workers to younger workers. Let's break it down.
Let's do it. What are the age groups?
They define the older cohort as those aged 50 to 64, and the younger cohort as those aged 20 to 49. Let's trace the men first. In 1975, the employment rate of older men was 93% of the employment rate of younger men.
So they were practically neck and neck, 93%.
Very close. But then we hit that era of deindustrialization we mentioned earlier, that cliff edge.
The bottom fell out.
Right. By 1995, that ratio had crashed down to 78%.
78%. So older men were significantly less likely to be working than the youth.
Exactly. The 90s were an era where younger workers truly were dominating the labor force participation statistics. The older generation had essentially been pushed to the sidelines.
But the sidelines didn't hold them, because something triggered a massive reversal.
From 1995 to 2015, the recovery speed of the older demographic completely outpaced the younger demographic. The older workers surged back.
They just came roaring back.
It did. By 2015, the ratio for men had climbed all the way back up to 88%.
Wait, and what happened with the women's ratio over that exact same 20-year span?
The female data is even more aggressive.
I'm not surprised.
In 1995, the ratio of older working women to younger working women was 72%.
Okay.
By 2015, it had reached an astonishing 86%.
86%. So the gap between young and old employment rates is shrinking at an incredible velocity.
It's closing fast.
It makes me think of a game of musical chairs.
Yeah.
Like, for a while, the music was playing, and the younger generation had all the chairs.
Right.
But somewhere around 1995, the older generation decided to stop the music, turn around, and violently reclaim their seats.
That's a perfect analogy.
And the younger workers are left standing around looking at each other, wondering where their spot in the economy went.
The musical chairs analogy captures the competitive nature of the labor market perfectly.
Yeah.
The older generation re-entrenched itself.
But why? I mean, to understand why they took the chairs back, we have to look past simple employment trends and look at human biology, right?
Well, we're getting to the core of it, yes.
Why did millions of people suddenly feel this intense pressure to keep working rather than taking the traditional off-ramp?
Well, the easy answer, the one you always hear on the news, is that politicians tinkered with the state pension age.
Right. They moved the retirement goalposts, so people had to work longer.
Policy plays a role, sure, but it is a reaction to a much deeper, much more profound shift. The root cause is the longevity trap.
The longevity trap.
Yes, we are living significantly longer, and that extra time comes with a brutal, invisible financial price tag.
Okay, let's look at the actual life expectancy numbers, because when I read this in the report, they were staggering.
They are. Between 1970 and 2010, the life expectancy for a 60-year-old man in England and Wales shot up by 7 years.
7 extra years.
And for a 60-year-old woman, it increased by 5 years.
I mean, in the grand scope of human history, adding almost a decade to average life expectancy in just 40 years is a medical miracle.
It's entirely unprecedented, and the authors point to the plummeting mortality risk.
What does that mean exactly?
If you take a 65-year-old man in 1970, his risk of dying in that specific year was about 3.4%. By 2015, that one-year mortality risk for a 65-year-old had fallen by a factor of 3, down to just 1.1%.
Wow.
Medical science essentially conquered a vast amount of late-stage mortality. We got really good at keeping the human machine running.
And on the surface, everyone celebrates that, right? You hear 7 extra years, and you picture pharmaceutical commercials.
Oh yeah, the silver-haired couples riding bikes.
Exactly. You picture vibrant seniors jogging on the beach, playing tennis, spending an extra decade playing with their grandchildren. You just naturally assume the quality of those years matches the quantity.
And that, unfortunately, is the health illusion.
The health illusion.
This is where the NBER report introduces some truly sobering data. The researchers didn't just look at death rates. They dug into something called the General Household Survey.
Which is what?
It's a long-term tracker where individuals self-report their actual daily health and their ability to function over decades.
Okay, so not just if they're alive, but how they actually feel. What did the survey reveal about those extra 7 years?
It revealed that older people's self-reported health has barely improved at all over this entire 40-year period.
Wait, really? Barely improved?
Barely. Medical technology became incredible at preventing death, but it did not fundamentally improve the baseline vitality of the aging body.
So we cured the acute things that kill you quickly, like certain heart attacks.
Right.
But we didn't cure the chronic things that degrade you slowly, like arthritis, back pain, or just systemic fatigue.
Exactly the distinction. The report cites another recent paper looking at a specific 2.1-year increase in life expectancy that occurred over a single recent decade.
Right.
Of those 2.1 extra years of life, nearly half of it, 0.9 years, was spent in a state of not good health.
Wow. That completely reframes the entire concept of modern retirement.
It does.
We didn't gain a glorious, vibrant decade of leisure. We basically gained a prolonged, disease-burdened survival period.
And this prolonged survival period fundamentally broke the old wealth accumulation model.
How so?
Well, the mid-20th century retirement model assumed you saved a specific portion of your income, you retired at 65, and that nest egg only needed to sustain you for a few years before you passed away.
Right, the math was pretty contained.
But if you suddenly have to fund an extra 5 to 7 years of life, and specifically 5 to 7 years of life that will likely require expensive medical interventions, prescription drugs, and possibly assisted care.
The old math simply shatters under the weight of it.
It shatters. The financial reality forces behavior to change. People realize their nest egg is vastly insufficient for an 85-year lifespan.
So what do?
They drag bodies that are essentially no healthier than their predecessors into the workplace for longer and longer stretches.
Man, that is bleak.
They're working through the fatigue because outliving their money is a more terrifying prospect than physical exhaustion.
Which brings us to a really fascinating paradox about who exactly is doing this extended labor, because from the time we are in grade school, the promise of education is framed around freedom.
Oh, absolutely. The great equalizer.
Right. We're told that if you study hard, get a university degree, and become a highly educated professional, you will achieve early wealth. You will escape the grind.
But the NBER data shows that knowledge does not act as an escape hatch.
Not at all.
In many ways, higher education operates as a chain that locks you to the labor market for a much longer portion of your life.
Let's get into that.
Mm-hmm.
How does the report define the education tiers?
They look at the age people left full-time education. Higher education is defined as those who stayed in school until age 21 or old, essentially university graduates.
Okay, and the other end.
Low education refers to those who left at the compulsory minimum age, which historically in the UK was around 15 or 16.
And historically, what is the behavioral difference between those two groups in the labor market?
Historically, high-educated individuals stay in the workforce much later into their lives than low-educated individuals.
Which, I mean, the intuitive logic there makes perfect sense. If you have a master's degree, you are likely sitting at a desk, typing on a keyboard, or sitting in meetings.
Mm-hmm.
You can physically manage that job at 65 much easier than a low-educated worker who has been pouring concrete or doing heavy lifting for 40 years.
Their bodies simply give out earlier.
Right.
That physical distinction is a core part of it. And over the last 40 years, there's been a massive societal push for higher education. The overall pool of the high-educated group expanded enormously.
So just by simple demographic math, because more people have degrees and degree holders naturally retire later, a larger portion of the population is structurally locked into working longer.
Exactly. But the report highlights a massive anomaly in the last 20 years that totally disrupts this neat logic.
Oh, this is the part that really surprised me. The bottom tier counterattack.
This is one of the most surprising findings in the entire data set. If you look at the period from 1995 to 2015, and you ask which demographic had the fastest, most explosive rebound in employment rates.
It wasn't the university graduates.
It wasn't.
It was the men who dropped out of school at the absolute minimum legal age, the lowest tier of formal education.
Yes. Their employment rate didn't just rebound, it surged. Between 1995 and 2015, the employment rate of these low-educated, older men blew right past their own historical levels from the 70s.
They just flooded back into the labor market.
They did. Meanwhile, the high-educated men, despite working longer generally, still haven't managed to recover their own historical high watermarks from the 80s.
I'm trying to make sense of this. Because what force is powerful enough to push men with no formal qualifications? Men whose bodies are likely battered by decades of manual labor back onto the factory floor, or into low-wage service jobs in their late 50s and 60s at record-breaking rates.
It's a great question.
Did the jobs suddenly get easier, or did the alternative to working suddenly get much worse?
The alternative got drastically worse. The authors point directly to a series of harsh institutional policy changes that targeted the safety net.
Okay, let's talk about the safety net.
In the UK, a critical turning point was the 1995 reform of disability benefits.
Walk me through what happened in 1995.
So, prior to 1995, the system utilized something called the invalidity benefit.
Invalidity benefit.
Right. If you were a 60-year-old manual laborer and your back gave out, the medical testing was relatively forgiving. You could transition onto this benefit, and it functioned, for all intents and purposes, as an early retirement pathway.
It caught the people who physically couldn't make it to the official state pension age.
Precisely. But the government saw how many older men were using this pathway, realized how staggeringly expensive it was, and decided to close the loophole.
So they changed the rules.
They replaced the invalidity benefit with the incapacity benefit. And it wasn't just a name change, it was a fundamental tightening of the screws.
How so?
The medical testing became incredibly stringent. The explicit policy goal was to reduce the caseload. And who does a strict medical test impact the most?
The low-educated manual laborers who rely on that specific safety net. So the state effectively removed the escape hatch. These men didn't suddenly discover a renewed passion for working at age 62. They were systematically squeezed out of the welfare state and forced back into the labor market simply to survive.
That's the cold reality of it. The authors also note a fascinating nuance regarding education data, though.
What's that?
We have to be careful when we only look at school leaving age. They found that a surprising number of men who left school at 15 actually went on to acquire vocational qualifications or equivalents to high school diplomas later in life.
Oh, outside the traditional academic track.
Yes, they upskilled themselves while working.
But does that change the overall picture?
No. Even when the researchers control for that late-in-life upskilling, the macro trend holds completely true. The institutional safety nets that historically allowed the working class to rest when their bodies broke down were systematically dismantled.
And that institutional shift is really just the warm-up act for the most violent structural change detailed in the report.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if tightening disability benefits forced the poorest back to work, a quiet revolution in the corporate world ensured that almost no one, regardless of education, could ever feel truly secure about retiring.
We are talking about the mechanics of the pension system.
Yes, I'm talking about the pension risk transfer. This is a massive trap.
This is arguably the most profound economic transformation of the last half-century. The abandonment of the defined benefit pension.
The financial jargon here is so dry, defined benefit versus defined contribution, that it completely camouflages how catastrophic this shift was for the average worker's life trajectory.
It sounds so boring, but it's everything.
Let's break down the mechanics of how a defined benefit, or DB, pension actually worked.
So a defined benefit pension was essentially a promise. The employer guaranteed that upon reaching a specific retirement age, they would pay you a secure fixed income for the rest of your life.
No matter how long you lived.
Right. The amount was usually based on your final salary and your years of service.
I like to think of a DB pension as a massive city water reservoir.
Okay, I like that.
The employer is responsible for building the reservoir, maintaining the dam, and ensuring it catches enough rain. When you retire, you get a pipe hooked up to your house, and a steady, guaranteed pressure of water flows into your home until the day you die.
That's a great visual.
If there's a drought or a stock market crash, it is not your problem. The city or the employer bears 100% of the risk to keep the water flowing.
That is an excellent way to visualize the risk allocation. And crucially, a DB pension actively incentivized you to stop working at a normal age.
Wait, how did it incentivize that?
The mathematical formulas were designed so that if you retired at 65, you maximized your payout. If you decided to keep working until you were 70, you usually didn't accrue any significant extra pension wealth.
Ah, so the economic signal was loud and clear. Hit the target age, take your pension, and exit the labor force.
Exactly. It was a concrete bunker. You knew what you had, and you knew exactly when you could leave the battlefield.
So why did employers destroy the bunker?
Because keeping the reservoir full became terrifyingly expensive.
When was this?
In the late 80s and through the 90s, several factors collided. Accounting standards changed, forcing companies to transparently list these massive future pension liabilities on their balance sheets.
Which terrified investors, I bet.
Absolutely terrified them. Then the dot-com bubble burst, damaging the investments that funded these pensions. But the ultimate killer was the longevity data we just discussed.
The extra 7 years.
Yes. When the actuaries realized they had to pay out these guaranteed salaries for almost a decade longer than originally modeled, corporate panic set in.
They realized they were on the hook for billions more than they planned.
The cost of maintaining the DB system became fundamentally incompatible with maximizing short-term shareholder value.
So employers executed a masterstroke of risk transfer. They closed the DB pensions and replaced them with defined contribution, or DC pensions.
Right.
This is what most people know today as a 401k in the U.S., or a standard workplace pension in the U.K. How does the risk model shift under a DC system?
It shifts entirely onto your shoulders. With a DC pension, the employer promises absolutely nothing about your final outcome.
Nothing.
They only promise to contribute a set amount, a defined contribution into an individual investment account in your name.
So going back to the analogy, the employer stops maintaining the city reservoir.
Yeah.
Instead, on your first day of work, they hand you a plastic bucket and wish you luck catching your own rain.
That's exactly it. And you have to catch that rain while navigating the unpredictable hurricanes of the global stock market.
Good luck.
Yeah. The final amount you have at retirement depends entirely on how much was contributed and how the financial markets performed during your working years.
And if we look at the incentive structure, it completely inverts.
Totally. A DC pension provides zero incentive to ever leave paid work. There is no maximum payout age.
Right.
In fact, it severely penalizes early retirement. Every extra year you work is a year you are not draining your bucket and a year you are adding more water to it.
This is where the longevity trap snaps shut. Because you don't know if you're going to live to 75 and 95, you have to mathematically assume you will live to 95 just to be safe.
You have to.
You have to save for a worst-case scenario of extreme longevity. If the stock market takes a 20% dip the year you turn 64, you can't retire.
No, you're trapped.
Because a market dip today means you might literally run out of money and starve when you are 83.
The system realized human life was getting longer, decided it refused to pay the bill for that extra time, and successfully pushed the entire financial burden of human longevity onto the individual.
Wow.
The risk of outliving your wealth became the primary mechanism forcing people to keep grinding, keeping older labor force participation rates artificially high out of sheer terror of poverty.
This brings us back to the incredible surge in female employment we discussed earlier.
Right, the rocket ship.
Yeah, we asked if women truly chose this continuous, relentless labor, or if they were structurally forced into it. And the NBER authors looked at specific birth cohorts of women, and the data paints a picture of a destiny that was locked in before these women even reached middle age.
The cohort analysis is deeply revealing. The researchers compared the life trajectory of women born in the 1950s against women born in the 1960s.
It's a 10-year difference.
Just 10 years.
Yeah.
But we are looking at how their employment behavior changed across their entire lifespan.
Okay, let's trace the women born in the 1950s. They come of age in the 1970s. What does their labor curve look like?
They exhibit a very traditional, pronounced child-rearing dip. In their early 20s, their employment rates were high. But right around age 27, the curve crashes.
How far down?
Their employment rate plummets from roughly 2/3 down to about 50%. A massive segment of this cohort exited the labor market to raise children.
Right, the traditional model.
Then, as they move through their 30s and 40s, you see the line slowly slope back up as they gradually re-entered the workforce.
Now contrast that with the women born just one decade later, the 1960s cohort. They hit age 27 in the late 80s or early 90s.
For the 1960s cohort, that massive child-rearing dip completely vanishes.
Just gone.
Just gone. The line remains high and relatively flat. They stayed locked into the labor market straight through their 20s and 30s.
Because the economic pressures we talked about, the rising cost of housing, the absolute need for dual incomes had fully set in.
Right.
Taking 5 years off to raise a child was no longer economically viable for the majority of families. But what are the long-term compounding effects of that vanished dip?
Because they never left, this 1960s cohort accumulated massive, uninterrupted blocks of work experience.
Ah.
They built seniority, they remained integrated into corporate hierarchies, and they became structurally dependent on continuous income.
So by the time this specific cohort hit their late 50s and 60s, continuing to work wasn't some newfound liberating choice.
Not at all. It was the only momentum they knew. They had been on the treadmill continuously for 40 straight years.
They were deeply integrated into the machine. And the terrifying thing about being integrated into a machine is that the machine can pull levers that control your behavior instantly.
Instantly.
The NBER data provides a perfect, almost laboratory-like example of what happens when policymakers simply decide to turn a dial.
This brings us to the manipulation of the finish line.
Yes, the policy guillotine.
In April 2010, the UK government enacted a major policy shift. They began gradually pushing back the state pension age for women, moving it from the historical age of 60 up to 65 to equalize it with men.
They just erased the finish line and painted a new one 5 miles down the road.
Basically, yeah.
How did the female labor force react to that stroke of a pen?
The reaction was immediate, measurable, and highly compliant.
Compliant.
Between 2010 and 2014, as the policy took effect, the employment rate of women aged exactly 60 and 61 was violently dragged upward.
By how much?
It jumped by an astonishing 6.3 percentage points in just a 4-year window.
That is, millions of women who probably had mental countdown clocks set for their 60th birthday, suddenly realizing the safety net had evaporated and just silently continuing to work.
They had no choice. Zero room for rebellion.
It totally shatters the illusion of individual autonomy. We like to think we are authors of our own destiny, deciding when we have saved enough to rest.
Right, that we're in control.
But this proves we are highly reactive organisms trapped in a systemic cage. When the institutional gears shift, our behavior shifts instantly to survive.
And we have to look at where those gears are driving the wealth of the society.
Right.
Because this extended forced labor isn't just a story of survival. It has created a massive bottleneck at the very top of the economic pyramid.
This is the phenomenon of wage inversion, and it is the root cause of so much generational rage today.
Oh, absolutely.
We are fed this comforting myth that youth is your biggest asset. Young people are hungry, they understand new technology, they innovate, and therefore they capture the fastest wage growth.
That's the Silicon Valley fairy tale.
Right, but the NBER data shows that in the modern economy, this is a complete fabrication. The wealth is insanely concentrating into the hands of the gray-haired class.
To understand the bottleneck, look at the occupational data. Older workers are not just lingering in the economy taking low-tier service jobs.
They aren't just greeters.
No. They are aggressively hoarding the premium roles. The researchers tracked the percentage of 50 to 64-year-olds employed in professional, managerial, and technical occupations between 1995 and 2015.
The jobs with the highest salaries, the best benefits, and the most institutional power.
Yes, and the growth in those roles is dominated by the older cohort. For older men, their proportion in these top-tier jobs increased by 8.7 percentage points.
8.7.
For older women, it skyrocketed by a terrifying 13.6 percentage points.
I use the word terrifying because a corporate hierarchy is shaped like a pyramid. There are only so many director and VP titles to go around.
Exactly.
If the 60 and 65-year-olds are structurally forced to never retire, they never vacate those premium roles. The ceiling turns to concrete.
It does.
What happens to the 30-year-old trying to climb the ladder?
The upward mobility of the youth is choked off. The younger generation becomes trapped in middle or lower tier roles or forced into precarious gig economy work because the incumbency advantage of the older generation is insurmountable.
I'm sure someone listening right now is thinking, well, isn't that meritocracy? Older people have 30 years of experience, a massive network, and institutional knowledge. Of course, they hold the manager titles and make more money. Experience pays.
Experience has always paid a premium. That is a basic law of labor. But the rate of divergence we are seeing in the 21st century is entirely unprecedented.
The rate of divergence.
Yes. The NVCR authors indexed wages against inflation to measure actual, real purchasing power since 2003, and the divergence is shocking.
Break down the numbers. Who is winning the race against inflation?
The older generation is winning handily. The hourly wages of 65 to 69-year-olds grew at a rate that easily beat inflation.
Okay, so they're getting richer.
Their real wealth, their actual purchasing power, is expanding rapidly, even late in life.
And while the 65-year-olds are beating inflation, what happened to the 20 to 39-year-old cohort over that exact same period?
The younger cohort didn't just fail to keep up. Their wage growth actively lost to inflation.
Wait, really? Lost to inflation?
Yes, their paychecks are shrinking in real time. The purchasing power of the youth is evaporating year by year, while the older generation accumulates more.
It is a massive structural inversion of wealth. The top of the funnel, the older workers holding the managerial roles and the expanding wages, is retaining everything.
Everything.
And the bottom of the funnel is drying up. The youth are structurally locked out of meaningful wage growth.
This data perfectly quantifies the generational tension that defines modern politics and culture. When younger generations express frustration, they aren't just being entitled.
Right, they aren't just lazy.
No, their economic reality is objectively deteriorating relative to the generations above them. They are working just as hard, but the mechanisms of wealth accumulation have been pulled up like a drawbridge.
Let's pull the camera all the way back and synthesize this massive 40-year narrative.
Yeah, let's look at the whole picture.
The NBER data forces us to confront a completely different reality than the one we are sold. We started by dismantling the illusion of the overworked grandpa, discovering that older men are actually working less than they did in the 70s, while older women were swept into an unending, relentless rocket ship of labor participation.
Then we examined the generational status reversal, where older workers aggressively reclaimed labor market dominance from the youth.
Right, the musical chairs.
We confronted the dark reality of the longevity trap, the fact that we are living 7 years longer, but we are dragging sick, exhausted bodies to the office because our health span hasn't matched our lifespan.
We saw how the safety net was systematically dismantled. Disability loopholes were closed, forcing the poorest back to the factory floor.
Squeeze from the bottom.
And the corporate world executed the ultimate betrayal, shifting from defined benefit to defined contribution pensions. They took the risk of old age off their balance sheets and dropped it squarely onto our individual shoulders, turning longevity into a terrifying financial liability.
And finally, we saw the ultimate result of all these forces. A wage inversion where the older class hoards the premium jobs and the wealth, leaving the youth trapped beneath a concrete ceiling with shrinking paychecks.
It is a comprehensive, deliberate re-engineering of the social contract.
It really is.
The rules of the game were rewritten over 40 years to ensure that you, the individual, bear all the risk, absorb all the anxiety, and never stop running.
Yes.
So, to you listening right now, if you feel exhausted, if you feel like the math of your life simply isn't adding up no matter how hard you hustle, this data proves you aren't crazy.
It's not a personal failure.
It is not a personal failure. You are operating inside a system that was specifically designed to keep you running.
The autonomy we think we possess is heavily bounded by these invisible macroeconomic and institutional levers. Recognizing how those levers work is the first step to understanding your actual position on the board.
And that leads me to a final provocative thought. Something the NBER data points toward, but leaves hanging in the air.
What's that?
We are currently living through an explosion of technological efficiency. Artificial intelligence is dominating the headlines, promising to automate vast swaths of cognitive and physical labor. We have more high-tech tools to generate productivity than at any point in human history.
That's true.
So why does human labor time feel like a curse we can never wake up from?
It's the ultimate paradox.
If the youth of today are already embracing movements like lying flat because their wages are structurally suppressed, while the elderly are forced into an involuntary hustle just to survive the cost of their own prolonged lifespan, what is the breaking point?
Right, where does it end?
What happens when the very bottom of the societal funnel simply refuses to participate in a game they are mathematically guaranteed to lose? Are we actually using technology to build an advanced, liberated future? Or are we just using AI and algorithms to enforce the oldest feudal history of all, working until the day we drop? Keep diving, keep questioning,